Reading The World Viewed: Reflections on the Ontology of Film by Stanley Cavell. Types, cycles as genres. Around this point, our attention turns from the physical medium of cinema in general to the specific forms or genres the medium has taken in the course of its history. Both Panofsky and Bazin began at the beginning, noting and approving that early movies adopt popular or folk arts and themes and performers and characters, farce, melodrama, circus, music hall, romance, etc. And both are gratifyingly contemptuous of intellectuals who could not come to terms with those facts of life. Such intellectuals are the alter egos of the film promoters they so heartily despise. Roxy once advertised a movie as, quote, art in every sense of the word, end quote. His better half declaims, quote, this is not art in any sense of the word, end quote. Our question is, why did such forms and themes and characters lend themselves to film? Bazin, in what I have read of him, is silent on the subject, except to express gratitude to film for revivifying these ancient forms, and to justify in general the legitimacy of adaptation from one art to another. Arnold Hauser, if I understand him, suggests wrong answers in a passage that includes the remark, quote, only a young art can be popular, end quote, a remark that not only is in itself baffling, did Verdi and Dickens and Chaplin and Frank Loesser work in young arts, but suggests that it was only natural for the movies to pick up the forms they did. It was natural anyway, it happened fast enough, but not because movies were destined to popularity. They were at first no more popular than other forms of entertainment. In any case, popular arts are likely to pick up the forms and themes of high art for their material. Popular theater naturally burlesque. And it means next to nothing to say that movies are young, because we do not know what the normal lifespan of an art is supposed to be, nor what would count as a unit of measure. Panofsky raises the question of the appropriateness of these original forms, but his answer is misleading. Block quote. The legitimate paths of evolution for the film were opened not by running away from the folk art character of the primitive film, but by developing it within the limits of its own possibilities. Those primordial archetypes of film productions on the folk art level, success or retribution, sentiment, sensation, pornography, and crude humor, could blossom forth into genuine history, tragedy and romance, crime and adventure, and comedy, as soon as it was realized that they could be transfigured, not by an artificial injection of literary values, but by the exploitation of the unique and specific possibilities of the new medium. End of block quote. The instinct here is sound, but the region is full of traps. What are, quote, the unique and specific possibilities of the new medium, end quote, question mark. Panofsky defines them as dynamization of space and spatialization of time. That is, in a movie things move, and you can be moved instantaneously from anywhere to anywhere, and you can witness successively events happening at the same time. He speaks of these properties as, quote, self-evident to the point of triviality, end quote, and because of that, quote, easily forgotten or neglected, end quote. One hardly disputes this or its importance, but we still do not understand what makes these properties, quote, the possibilities of the medium, end quote. I am not now asking how one would know that these are the unique and specific possibilities, though I will soon get back to that. I am asking what it means to call them possibilities at all. Why, for example, didn't the medium begin and remain in the condition of home movies, one shot just physically tacked onto another, cut and edited simply according to subject, end quote, or question mark. Newsreels essentially did, and they are nevertheless valuable enough so to have justified the invention of moving pictures. The answer seems obvious. Narrative movies emerged because someone, quote, saw the possibilities, end quote, of the medium, cutting and editing and taking shots at different distances from the subject. But again, these are mere actualities of film mechanics. Every home movie and newsreel contains them. We could say to make them, quote, possibilities of the medium, end quote, is to realize what will give them significance. For example, the narrative and physical rhythms of melodrama, farce, American comedy of the 1930s. It is not as if filmmakers saw these possibilities and then looked for something to apply them to. It is truer to say that someone with the wish to make a movie saw that certain established forms would give point to certain properties of film. This perhaps sounds like quibbling, but what it means is that the aesthetic possibilities of a medium are not givens. You can no more tell what will give significance to the unique and specific aesthetic possibilities of projecting photographic images by thinking about them or seeing some than you can tell what will give significance to the possibilities of paint by thinking about paint or by looking some over. You have to think about painting and paintings. You have to think about motion pictures. What does this, quote, thinking about them, end quote, consist in, question mark. Whatever the useful criticism of an art consists in. Painters before Jack Pollock had dripped paint, even deliberately. Pollock made dripping into a medium of painting. I feel like saying the first successful movies, i.e., the first moving pictures accepted as motion pictures, were not applications of a medium that was defined by given possibilities, but the creation of a medium by their giving significance to specific possibilities. Only the art itself can discover its possibilities. And the discovery of a new possibility is the discovery of a new medium. A medium is something through which or by means of which something specific gets done or said in particular ways. It provides, one might say, particular ways to get through to someone, to make sense. In art, they are forms, like forms of speech. To discover ways of making sense is always a matter of the relation of an artist to his art, each discovering each other. Panofsky uncharacteristically skips a step when he describes the early silent films as an, quote, unknown language forced upon a public not yet capable of reading it, end quote. His notion is, with good reason, writing when he did, of a few industrialists forcing their productions upon an addicted multitude. But from the beginning the language was not, quote, unknown, end quote. It was known to its creators, those who found themselves speaking it, and in the beginning there was no, quote, public, end quote, in question. There were just some curious people. There soon was a public, but that just proves how easy the thing was to know. If we are to say that there was an, quote, unknown, end quote, something, it was less like a language than like a fact. In particular, the fact that something is intelligible. So, while it may be true, as Panofsky says, that, quote, for a Saxon peasant of around 1800, it was not easy to understand the meaning of a picture showing a man as he pours water over the head of another man, end quote. This has nothing special to do with the problems of a moviegoer. The meaning of that act of pouring in certain communities is still not easy to understand. It was and is possible to understand for anyone to whom the practice of baptism is known. Why did Panofsky suppose that comparable understanding is essential or uniquely important to the reading of movies? Question mark. Apparently, he Okay, I'm missing a page, so I'm just gonna continue to the next page. I'm missing page 33. On to page 34. When in Gone with the Wind, Vivien Leigh, having counted on Butterfly McQueen's professed knowledge of midwifery, and finding her as ignorant as her, she slaps her in rage and terror. The moment can stun us with a question. What was the white girl assuming about blackness when she believed the casual claim of a black girl, younger and duller and more ignorant than herself, to know all about the mysteries of childbirth? Question mark. The assumption, though apparently complimentary, is dehumanizing. With such creatures, knowledge of the body comes from nowhere, and in general, they are to be trusted absolutely or not at all, like lions in a cage, with whom you either do or do not know how to deal. After the slap, we are left with two young girls equally frightened in a humanly desperate situation, one limited by a distraction which expects and forgets that it is to be bullied, the other by an energetic resourcefulness which knows only how to bully. At the end of Michael Curtis's breaking point, as the wounded John Garfield is carried from his boat to the dock, awaited by his wife and children, and just outside the circle by the other woman in his life, Patricia Neal, the camera pulls away, holding on the still waiting child of his black partner, who only the unconscious Garfield knows has been killed. The poignance of the silence and unnoticed black child overwhelms the yarn we had been shown. Is he supposed to symbolize the fact of general human isolation and abandonment, or the fact that every action has consequences for innocent bystanders, or that children are real sufferers from the entangled efforts of adults to straighten out their lives, The effect here is to rebuke Garfield for attaching so much importance to the loss of his arm, and generally to blot out attention to individual suffering by invoking a massive social evil about which this film has nothing to say. The general difference between a film type and a stage type is that the individuality captured on film naturally takes precedence over the social role in which the individuality gets expressed, because on film, social role appears arbitrary and incidental. Movies have an inherent tendency toward the democratic, or anyway, the idea of human equality, but because of film's equally natural attraction to crowds, it has opposite tendencies toward the fascistic or populistic. This depends upon recognizing film types as inhabited by figures we have met or may well meet in other circumstances. The recognized recurrence of film performers will become a central idea as we proceed. At the moment, I am emphasizing only that in the case of black performers, there was until recently no other place for them to recur in, except just the role within which we have already met them. For example, we would not have expected to see them as parents or siblings. I cannot at the moment remember a black person in a film making an ordinary purchase, say of a newspaper or a ticket to a movie or for a train, let alone writing a check. Pinky and Raisin in the Sun prove the rule. In the former, the making of a purchase is a climactic scene in the film. In the latter, it proves the whole subject and structure. One recalls the list of stars of every magnitude who have provided the movie camera with human subjects, individuals capable of filling its need for individualities whose individualities in turn, whose inflections of demeanor and disposition were given full play in its projection. They provided and still provide staples for impersonators. One gesture or syllable of mood, two strides, or a passing mannerism was enough to single them out from all other creatures. They realized the myth of singularity, that we can that we can still be found behind our disguises of bravado and cowardice by someone, perhaps a god, capable of defeating our self-defeats. This was always more important than their distinction by beauty. Their singularity made them more like us, anyway, made their difference from us less a matter of metaphysics to which we must accede than a matter of responsibility to which we must bend. But then that made them even more glamorous, that they should be able to stand upon their singularity! Exclamation point. If one did that, one might be found and called out too soon or at an inconvenient moment. What was wrong with typecasting in films was not that it displaced some other, better principle of casting, but that factors irrelevant to filmmaking often influence the particular figures chosen. Similarly, the familiar historical fact that there are more cycles taken by certain movie theorists as in itself a mark of an unscrupulous commercialism is a possibility internal to the medium. One could even say it is the best emblem of the fact that a medium had been created, for a cycle is a genre: prison movies, Civil War movies, horror movies, etc., and a genre is a medium. As Hollywood developed, the original types ramified into individualities as various and subtle, as far-reaching in their capacities to inflect mood and release fantasy, as any set of characters who inhabited the great theaters of our world. We do not know them by such names as Pulcinella, Crispin, Harlequin, Pantaloon, the Doctor, the Captain, Columbine. We call them the Public Enemy, the Priest, James Cagney, Pat O'Brien, the Confederate Spy, the Army Scout, Randolph Scott, Gary Cooper, Gable, Paul Mooney, the Reporter, the Sergeant, the Sheriff, the Deputy, the DA, the Quack, the Shyster, the Other Woman, the Fallen Woman, the Mole, the Dance Hall Hostess. Hollywood was the theater in which they appeared, because the films of Hollywood constituted a world with recurrent faces more familiar to me than the faces of the neighbors of all the places I have lived. The great movie comedians, Chaplin, Keaton, W.C. Fields, form a set of types that could not have been adapted from any other medium. Its creation depended upon two conditions of the film medium mentioned earlier. These conditions seem to be necessities, not merely possibilities. So I will say that two necessities of the medium were discovered or expanded in the creation of these types. First, movie performers cannot project, but are projected. Second, photographs are of the world, in which human beings are not ontologically favored over the rest of nature, in which objects are not props but natural allies or enemies of the human character. The first necessity, projected visibility, permits the sublime comprehensibility of Chaplin's natural choreography. The second, ontological equality, permits his Proustian or Jamesian relationships with Murphy beds and flights of stairs, and with vases and runners on the tables on rollers, the heroism of momentary survival, Nietzsche's man as a tightrope across an abyss. These necessities permit not merely the locales of Keaton's extrications, but the philosophical mood of his continence and the Olympic resourcefulness of his body. Permit him to be perhaps the only constantly beautiful and continuously hilarious man ever seen, as though the ugliness and laughter should be redeemed. They permit Phils to mutter and suffer and curse obsessively, but heard and seen only by us, because his attributes are those of the gentleman: confident swagger and elegant manners, gloves, cane, outer hardiness. He can manifest continuously, with the remorselessness of nature, the psychic brutalities of bourgeois civilization. And I was reading Types, Cycles as Genres, The World Viewed, Reflections on the Ontology of Film by Stanley Cavell.